No, I definitely hear you on that, especially this last one on the pleasure of becoming invisible and the kind of freedom that brings with being less sexualized. I have definitely experienced being on a walk, in the city or like going to the grocery store or literally any public place. There have definitely been times where I have felt unsafe being that
Sure.
I am a young woman who is, relatively pretty. And
Beautiful.
oh, stop it, you.
Yeah.
But no, I definitely hear you on that, and I would like to add that to one of my problems, if I may take it back to a place of that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's your list. Okay.
Yeah, let me just add that to my list. Being too damn sexy.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to a Generational Thing podcast. My name is Angela Latham.
And my name is Natalia Latham, and we are your hosts.
Today, we're going to talk about age and aging, how it feels to be a certain age, especially as women.
We're also going to talk about what age means at different stages in your life and the problems it brings, as well as the pleasures, of course.
Of course. We hope to end up in a land of aspirations where no matter what the challenges are that age brings, we wear our age with courage.
Do we?
Let's hope.
By the end of this episode, I'm sure that we will.
Sure.
But let's talk for a moment about the relevance of this topic for each of us.
Sure.
Obviously, this podcast is called a generational thing, meaning that generations and age are important to us.
Yes.
But with that, of course, like all of us human beings on this planet Earth, unfortunately, experience what it is to age. And as we mentioned, there are pleasures as well as problems, and we're here to talk about that, okay?
Yes. I think also that age often receives less attention or emphasis. And when there is an emphasis, I feel like there's often a lack of compassion. So those thoughts are part of why we think this is a more relevant topic, even than just the generational themes we tend to like to explore.
So let's get into it, shall we?
Yes, let's.
So, Miss Angie girl, I have a question for you. How is it that you experience age as an aspect of your identity right now? And can you please share some stories or examples?
Sure. I always feel that embodiment is a big part of how I sense my age. I've felt that way since I was a child, and I'm sure that's true for a lot of us. But I think I'm more conscious now of what my body tells me than I used to be. For example, I'm more protective of my sleep because sleep deprivation costs me more than it used to. I was at a quilting retreat last week, and it was with women. We were all on the older end of the spectrum, ranging from probably late 50s to mid. Well, there was one 85-year-old woman with this, bless her heart, and she was going at it. But I was really interested to hear a variety of comments as we sat at our work tables doing our quilt projects. These were often random pop-up conversations, but they were often about our aging bodies. And it was everything from weight figure challenges to arthritis impacting finger dexterity. One woman got us all laughing when she described an early experience she had of looking in a magnifying mirror past 50. And, we had a good laugh. But that's just a reminder of embodiment for me and the kinds of things that I think of when it comes to being my age in a certain body. But I would say also I consider my sphere of influence is a part of how I sense my change of age, the age I'm in right now. I'm still feeling this one out because I fairly recently left the workforce. And I actually don't mind not feeling directly responsible for as many people as I used to in my most recent case, a bunch of students, right? I'm I'm glad to tend to my own family and pursue some really long unfulfilled personal goals that I've had. If they happen to expand my sphere of influence at some point, I'm fine. If not, I'm also fine. That feels good to me as a part of aging. I was reading a piece in the Washington Post the other day. It was written by Mark Fisher, and it was about how many people are staying in the workforce well past retirement age. Not counting the people who are doing so for financial need, which there are many of those, but people who choose to just because of a variety of reasons. And he talked about a geriatric elite. I thought that was an interesting term in all kinds of industries. You know,
So true, girl. So true.
you know, people, there's so much control still in the hands of these folks. There was a public health researcher that he interviewed for part of this piece, a person named Brian Spisak. And there were some quotes I took away from that article, including the following: when one generation seems to be in charge, the results can be unsettling in politics and business alike. And when leadership stays too long, they can be stiff and unchanging. Older employees bring a ton of practical knowledge. You know, that's the positive side. But if you're staying on and status hoarding, maybe you're not really a leader. You're just somebody in a hierarchy trying to maintain power. I thought, wow.
How profound.
Well, I do know, I've known people that feels to me like a very good description of what was happening in more than one workplace I've had. Fortunately, I do feel good about saying that's at least one thing this boomer isn't guilty of.
And I can attest to that.
Well, only because if nothing else, I got out, at what, 60, almost 61. So I didn't stay even as long as I might have, but I did see a lot of people holding on. And really, just to wrap up, though, you asked a very good question about, age and identity and how you experience that. And for me, the last thing is probably the most, profound of the things. And that's my shorter sense of a timeline remaining and how to make the most of that time. I'm really much more strategic about the ways I apply my skill sets. And I sometimes make difficult choices. Right now, I feel like I am in the process of making difficult choices about what I realistically have time left to accomplish.
Well, I don't know what you mean with time left, because you're going to live forever. Okay, girl, I'm not allowing it any other way.
Very sweet, but
I'm just speaking the truth. But I'm really intrigued by this quote that you pulled out from the Washington Post,
Yes.
was it? Where, like, if you're staying on and status hoarding, maybe you're just really trying to maintain power. Politics,
Yeah.
Anybody? Our government, anybody?
Yes, there's a lot. And in a lot of industries. There were several good examples of
Yes.
that. I mean, there was a quote from a farmer, and yeah, I was really interested in it, sure.
Wow, love that.
Yeah. Well, what about you? I'm flipping the question back. What's your sense of that age, sense of how you carry your age, what it feels like to be your age?
Yeah. Well, for me right now, I feel like autonomy and like self-sovereignty is huge. I've been moved out of my parents' house for a few years now. I've lived in, I think this is my third house outside of my parents' house now since graduating college a few months ago. And well, this is not my third house since graduating college, but over the course of college and post-grad, not having to live under the same powers and authorities that come with being in college and like being like a full-grown independent woman right now feels huge for me. And I'm feeling that sense of independence and, like I said, autonomy that I've yearned for since I was like 12, 13, you know? But yeah, that is definitely a huge sense of my, a sense of how I gauge my identity with my age right now. Just coming into that independence is very big. But also, however, with the empowerment that comes from that, and as living as an independent young woman, there's also this like really deep-seated fear of the reality that I'm living as an independent woman in a late-stage capitalism America.
Yes.
And, of course, there's a lot of privilege that comes with me being able to say that, given all of the other tragedy happening in the rest of the world right now. But I feel like I just experienced such an overwhelming sense of hopelessness and nihilism when I think about what the world could look like in like 10 to 15 years from now for me,
Yes.
Or, given the rate that things have been going, maybe even in 1 year,
Yeah.
So
I hear
I know you feel me there. But with all that being said, I also, whenever I was thinking about this question, I feel like it's kind of difficult for me to really put into words how it is that like age factors into my aspect of identity right now. Maybe I already have worded that well enough, but I also just like find myself thinking about the future so much. Like I'm so future forward that it's hard to really think about right now for me, I guess. And maybe that's normal for folks my age,
Yeah.
Someone, please write in, let me know. But there are just so many things that I want to do and accomplish and see and experience and all of that good shit. And I just it's a very eagerly overwhelming feeling, if that makes any sense.
Let me ask a follow-up question to what we've been talking about. What do you think some of the key differences are intergenerationally between boomers and zoomers, the obvious groups we belong to?
Well, my initial thought to that is that boomers and zoomers are completely on the opposite ends of the spectrum, which is true in regard to, numerical age, but also in regard to like generational morals and ethics and such, which is why we're here to break the stigma. Am I right?
Yeah.
But it feels like Generation Z, the Zoomers, is seen as like the annoying little brat generation, which I really, really don't appreciate. And I really don't vibe with that because speaking from personal experience, that is not me. Okay. Maybe I'm wrong.
It's not. It is not.
I would like to speak for my whole generation, but I was curious to see like what other people had to say about Gen Z, and especially I was hoping for maybe like intergenerational thoughts on Gen Z, but my first result on Google popped up this Quora thread that was titled, "What is the most annoying trait among Zoomers and Gen Z?" And oddly enough, the first post that popped up on the thread was by a woman named Angela.
Too funny.
I would like to think it wasn't you. Okay. But she said, and I quote, "Their obsession with social media, aka their obsession with themselves, the fact that they're living in a fake virtual world where they think everything they're doing is so important. Yet when you put your tiny screens down and walk outside, no one knows about or gives a shit about the 20 selfies you posted this week, or the fact that you morons now label everything Y2K as if the year 2000 makes any sense to label shit with, unless it came from that specific year. God, I hate them and all their idiotic challenges and trends. All just copying each other, and none of them are original."
Oh,
To which I said, damn. And then another woman named Linda on this thread said, and I quote, "I hate all the little fuckers." And she put all in all caps. And I said, to which I said, damn. And like, I can obviously assume that these lovely women, Miss Angela and Miss Linda, are not from my generation. But whenever I definitely like feel that, like both like from online stuff that I've seen, or just living firsthand as a Gen Z person, I definitely feel like, especially like living in the internet age and growing up on the internet, like I've just seen and felt and experienced that like there is such a backlash with how Gen Z is perceived and not taken seriously because of all of these circumstances,
Well, I would just interject briefly that, just to make sure that we acknowledge our consciousness as historians, you with your history background and mine with my own in different fields. But, what we say all of this, and I agree with you, there's a different tone to things right now, acknowledging surely that we know that there have been generational divides all through history. And certainly I can think of many periods in the 20th century where
Right.
there was
Right.
a tension like this. But I do think that there's a specific component to it. You mentioned the social media stuff, and I do think that that has exacerbated a lot of the vile, what you're talking about.
Right. Exactly.
But yes, continue. You were going to say more on this topic. So
I would also just like to counter Miss Angela from Quora by quoting from this this article called "Okay Boomer Marks the End of Friendly Generational Relations" by Taylor Lorenz for the New York Times. In this article, it says, quote, Gen Z is going to be the first generation to have a lower quality of life than the generation before them, says Joshua Citarella, 32, a researcher who studies online communications. Teenagers today find themselves, he said, with three major crises all coming to a head at the Gen Z moment. Essentials are more expensive than ever before. We pay 50% of our income to rent, and no one has health insurance. So, Miss Angela and Miss Linda from Quora, please forgive us for posting 20 selfies a day to try and feel something when we have to inherit a significantly shittier world than you grew up with, okay?
yes, a very important take or comeback on that. I agree.
Yeah, like whenever I saw like this quote from the New York Times, especially like in response to this Quora thread, I was like, it just made me think about how there's, this internet thing where it's like, I'm just trying to feel something, maybe it's not even just like an internet thing, but just a human thing. Like we're just trying to like feel something. So forgive me for being wrapped up in TikTok all the time, and forgive me for posting 20 selfies a day or whatever, because if you look at the world around us, I think it's quite obvious that it's more comfortable to live online than it is in the real world,
I can see, yes, I think that's a very valid point. And for one thing, I would also say, just knowing you really well, you are not posting 20 selfies a day, but I still take your point for what it's worth.
Well, thank you.
You mentioned the OK Boomer piece, of course, and I really enjoyed reading that as a part of prepping for this episode as well. I really appreciated one thing about the author. I'm not you've already done great coverage, but I really appreciated how the author, again, you mentioned Taylor Lorenz, steered the conversation toward acknowledging age as an identity spectrum, sort of how we wanted to envision this podcast as well, because, so many aspects of our identity, are on a spectrum, where we talk about spectrum issues with identity, certainly with gender and sexuality, but age as well. And Lorenz is moving away from a binary focus on like the boomer-zoomer equation, because the title of the piece kind of gave me the sense it would be more, boomer, zoomer, anti, two. But there are a couple of quotes I'll just highlight myself, because they really did make this non-binary sense make more sense to me. And one of the first things was the OK Boomer was defined by the author as anyone over 30 who says something condescending about young people and the issues that matter to them. Linda? Angela, you listening?
Linda.
But, even over 30. So it's not so strictly defined by ages as the titles Zoomer and Boomer would indicate. But the other thing that clarified it for me was a quote from an expert that was interviewed, Mr. Williams, for the article, was saying, in the end, boomer is just a state of mind. Anyone can be a boomer with the right attitude. You don't like change. You don't understand new things, especially related to technology. You don't understand equality. Being a boomer is just having that attitude, and it can apply to whoever is bitter toward change. And I think that's really, really illuminating, or it's a really nice way to parse some of this conversation, because, it can go both directions. I've known, obviously, boomers who are more of a, youthful mindset. And then I've known some Zoomers who were very, I've taught in the classroom, I've taught a lot of Zoomers, and I've seen some students who were very much stuck in I don't want change. I don't want to learn this. The attitude is much more like what we traditionally or, unfortunately think of as affiliated with older ages. So those were some important takeaways for me.
If I may just turn the question back to you now, Miss Girl, what are some things that you think define the key differences intergenerationally between the boomers and Zoomers?
Well, picking up on some of what you said, and the whole notion of being a Zoomer, I chafe under that label for a number of reasons, but one of them is certainly what you were talking about, the kind of world we're leaving behind. By the way, if you haven't looked it up lately, a boomer's age span is typically defined in the U.S. as born between 1943 and 1964. And there are breakdowns of that and, even subgroups and so forth, because it's a pretty wide age span. But however that label is applied, it's, when we think of the boomer generation, and we often think of their many contributions to the progress of humanity when we look at history, but it's really sad for me to think about how our generation has siphoned off so many of the Earth's resources, and we're leaving behind a world that's so much less inhabitable and in many ways less equitable than the one we grew up in. So that's one of the things I think a lot about. But, I also had an article that I recommended to you before this episode because it did have to do with those labels also. And it was a piece that was entitled The Hidden Moral Injury of OK Boomer. And I just wondered, I don't know if you got a chance to read that. I was really taken, though, by how, and we don't have to go into it in great depth, but the opening piece of that, it was an op-ed in the New York Times by David French, and I just thought it was really telling that there was a comment early on that the author said, I can't remember the last time our country had a longer or more agonizing conversation about age. And, despite what I just said about the long history of tensions between generations, he's really reinforcing this sense that we're in a new world when it comes to these matters. Mm-hmm. But and we could go on a lot of that and a lot of the comments in that article. I really recommend to people that it's a thought piece that it might be worth your time to read. But one of the other takeaways for me was, in light of your, turning that question about one of the things I think about when it comes to what I see among friends who are boomers and people I've worked with is what he refers to as workism, and how central work and career are to a sense of self and identity. And I don't think that's just a boomer thing, but when it is so central to the identity of whether you're young or old, especially perhaps an issue for more educated classes in America, there's, this workism comes into play. And even if it's not necessarily related to the more elite jobs or corporate jobs, I mentioned, I actually was taken by a quote he uses of someone in the piece who's, I think, in his only 60, but, had downsized his work life from 60 hours a week to 30, and said, I'm quite lost from not working. And while grandparenting adds purpose, I'm addicted to accomplishment. And I thought, wow, if that doesn't say workism, I mean, I almost don't need a specific definition. That quote pretty well sums it up. And I find that common among people in my age group. And I guess for me personally, I love work. I love to keep momentum and accomplishment. I get that. But for me personally, it's not tied to specific employment. And that's one of the reasons I think I was able to let go of employment that actually was very meaningful to me, but I just decided to shift the focus of my life. And
Right.
unfortunately, a lot of boomers are unwilling to do that, even when it becomes appropriate for them to do so.
Right. Right. I'm really struck by the way that this farmer who's downsized his work life has said that like he, grandparenting adds purpose to his life, but he's addicted to accomplishment. Like I can grandparenting not be can that not add a sense of accomplishment to one's life? I guess that
it sure does for me.
I was going to say, like, I know a certain someone who's a grandparent who feels very fulfilled and very accomplished in being the best grandee there ever could possibly be.
Why, thank you.
But, well, of course.
I will say that I do understand the need for other things, though, and I wouldn't say that could be the be all and end all of my sense of identity, nor would we expect that fully of a parent, for example. Some people, prioritize things in different ways or have to prioritize things in different ways. But I guess I'm mildly sympathetic that a person might not want to make their grandparenting their entire gig. I'm very sympathetic to that, in fact, because, you've done the parenting thing once and it's great to have the grandkids come over, but it may or may not be what you want for your entire work life.
Right.
However, it's almost like there's a but implied in what he's saying. It's purposeful, but I'm addicted to accomplishment. I'm adding that in. It may not be fair, but I sense that. And so I take your meaning very well.
Right.
So.
Right. I actually did get to read this article, and something that struck me from this was where they're talking about, I think they did like a survey of parents within the boomer generation in regard to their children who, would be like Gen Z, millennials and such.
Yeah.
And they were asking what was most important to them about seeing what was most important for their children to accomplish.
Sure.
And it said an extraordinary 88% said that financial independence was extremely or very important. And there was another statistic that was like much lower. I wish I had taken note of that. I can't recall it now, but I guess that just struck me as like the sense of addiction to accomplishment is not only something that is felt within the boomer generation, but then is passed on to their children, because that 88% tells me that if their children are not financially independent and cannot financially support themselves independently, then they're a failure, And meanwhile, these children that they speak of, which would, me, my generation, millennial generation, like we acknowledge that we need work to survive, but then at the same time, we also want to live our lives, And if that means being, well, this is perhaps a little irresponsible to say, but if that means, I'm a little low on money 1 month because I wanted to treat myself to a trip, or if I wanted to treat myself to something else, then so be it. I am a human being and I deserve that. You know what I mean? So, I guess that was something that struck me from that article.
Sure. What you're saying very much resonates with things I've heard with criticisms, for example, of from an employer's perspective. And, the sense that employers are really having to shift their ways of attracting workers, their ways of keeping workers, younger workers, because there's a definite shift between boomers and zoomers in some of the mindset towards quality of life versus, the financial, the almighty dollar, as we used to say. And so, it's nice. I'm glad to hear you articulate some of those things, which are actually often criticized, but I think it's part of being authentically of your generation. And I very much think it's important that we older folks accept these things and hear these voices that are making, these are my priorities. This is different, and figure out how we work with these shared ideas instead of fighting each other on them. So, but easier said than done, I do realize.
Right. So true. So true. And thank you for advocating for the younger voices out there. Okay. We desperately want to be heard.
Okay. You're welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
Let's transition, shall we, into thinking about what it means when we think about what it means to age. What are some of the problematic parts of aging?
We don't have time for that, do we? No, there's.
Yeah, let's skip that.
No, I have given this some thought. I really, there are 2 or 3 things that come to mind really most prominently. For one thing, I think that at every stage of life, but certainly as you get older as well, the potential loss of autonomy or agency, or as you were saying, sovereignty, those words that all define freedom for yourself. And I think that can happen even at younger points or earlier points, necessarily, not necessarily younger, but, whether it's, marriage can be a shift in the level of agency you have, of course, jobs, certainly, have a way of controlling our lives, eventually becoming more dependent as you age. Even just the usual context specific and gendered boundaries of things like, how you feel you should dress and act and so forth as a female. Too old to dress like that, too bold or assertive to say that, or whatever. Those are the things that I think of, what the degree of autonomy or agency that you're able to keep are one of the problems. The other thing I think about is the longer you live, the statistically more likely you are to experience really horrible things, unfortunately.
What a great thing to hear.
Thanks. Yeah, just be ready, girl.
I can't wait.
I hope not. Of course not. No, but life is, if life is long, you're going to have tough stuff that comes along, and it may be to you directly or it may be to people you love. And so, that's something that I find problematic. And I remember when my mother was, not long before she died, one of her biggest sadnesses was how many people she had lost, and she felt quite alone. But I also think the last thing I would say is one becomes invisible as an older woman. I've heard a lot of women talk like this, and I've felt it myself. It's something, it's hard to describe exactly, more concretely, I should say, but there's a feeling of not really being seen any longer, even just in a public setting or in, a conversation, where there's a group of people talking, not like my quilt retreat. I feel very seen there, but in general, in mixed company, mixed age company, I would say. But I think that, of course, relates to some common prejudices about older people and, feeling like they may not have as much to contribute, which I won't elaborate on that. But those are the things that I feel are on the problematic side of growing older.
Right.
How about you?
Well, girl. It's complicated. But not really, although I've spoken about how much I love my independence and, I'm loving this freedom that I'm feeling at this point in my life. The independence is also something that kind of haunts me because, Angie, I'm literally just a girl. Okay. How the hell am I expected to work 40 hours a week, pay my bills, live my little girly life, be a material girl, and still be happy in this capitalist machine that we live in, Someone give me directions on how to do that, because
it's tough.
It's really rough out here. But another thing, a quote I came across whenever I was thinking about this subject is a quote by Dr. Seuss, my man, Dr. Seuss. Yeah. He said, "Adults are just obsolete children." And I can't quite tell you if I know exactly what he meant by that, but something about that really hits, because to me, that speaks to the inner child that we all still have and within us. And whenever you become an adult, it's expected by, I guess, by societal standards that, you kind of abandon that part of you because you're an adult now and you need to live in the real world, But inside, we're literally all, every single one of us, just girls, you know?
Except the boys, of
Except
course.
the boys, of course. But that just got me to thinking about how, in terms of legal standards, I've only been an adult for 5 years now, being that I'm 23. And excuse me, what the fuck? That's just it's difficult coming to terms with the responsibilities of adulthood whenever I still feel like I'm so fresh within it.
Sure.
And yeah, that's some tough stuff right there. But what's also some tough stuff is the existentialism that I begin to feel more and more now as it really begins to hit harder, and as I become more aware of and more personally affected by the things that are happening in the world.
Sure.
Like it's, of course, everybody it's good to be informed for everyone, for all of us, but I really find it hard to keep up with the news because it's just so painful to think about the world, like I've mentioned, the world that we're inheriting, you know, and
Sure.
by these systems of power in place that have just continually just caused more pain and harm and damage to everybody. So yeah, hashtag existentialism. Am I right? But I also wanted to talk about something that we had discussed about a possible topic for this episode was just coming of age in general.
Sure.
And I wanted to quickly read the definition of coming of age because it leads me to a point that I will get to in just a moment. But the term coming of age, as defined by Wikipedia, is a young person's transition from being a child to being an adult. The specific age at which this transition takes place varies between societies, as does the nature of the change, and it can be a simple legal convention or be a part of a ritual or spiritual event, as practiced by many societies. And when it says ritual or spiritual event, it made me think of liminality and liminal spaces, which might seem odd at first, but it was a discussion that we had in one of my art history classes talking about like physical liminal spaces and like the meaning,
Sure.
you know, and the significance of those things. And so then to read the definition of a liminal space by verywellmind.com, or in my case, veryunwellmind.com.
Oh.
It's the uncertain transition between where you've been and where you're going physically, emotionally, or metaphorically. And I guess to really sum things up here, it's the uncertainty of these transitions that just really makes the dread hit, you know, the uncertainty of what my, even though I am in adulthood right now, what I consider real adulthood, whatever that may actually be, will look like. And just the uncertainty of my future and all of these things that I would like to do for myself and experience, as I mentioned before, what's the likelihood of that all actually happening? And like, essentially, what's my life going to look like, you know?
Of course. Yeah. I hear you. No, it's a very understandable concern, especially when you think about some of the major issues we're facing as a across the globe, but also nationally.
When you think about what it means to age, what are some of the pleasures of aging? Please let me know.
A lot of the pleasures are really the flip side of the perils or the problems that we were just talking about. You know, first of all, just to talk about growing old or aging in itself is a privilege. You know, there are, so many untimely deaths of people that you hear of. And even just on a personal level, when I first had a bout with breast cancer in my early 40s, it was suddenly possible as a young woman to imagine never getting to grow old. And that really shook me. So as I age, I try to remember that it is, in fact, a privilege.
Mm-hmm.
But as you were talking, I would agree that, it comes back to, again, the flipping of what I was saying earlier, too. We've both talked a lot about autonomy and independence. And to me, one of the pleasures of growing older is also increased autonomy that happens throughout life, whether it's getting a driver's license, getting your first job, relationship choices that you make, and so forth. That's one thing. And I would also say one thing I've noticed is that at least some of the men we care about seem to improve with age. Hopefully that's true of the women as well. I don't mean to be sexist about that, but I do feel that there's a mellowing.
Yep.
That, that I've appreciated in friends and family and so forth, and and partners or spouses. I think people have talked about how that they've seen, some of my girlfriends at the quilt retreat or whatever, when we have these conversations, there seems to be general agreement that there are issues that happen over time, but there's also for all of us, I'm sure, a mellowing. And
Yes.
so as a woman, one appreciates that as
Yes.
it affects them in relationships with men. So another thing I would say is building a track record. I mentioned how that the longer you live, there's more, unfortunate things that you're going to face. But the older you get and the more things like that you live through and you even overcome does help increase one's confidence, or it can if you get enough therapy. But with the flip side of becoming sort of feeling invisible, one of the issues of age that women think a lot about is, the aspect of appearance and beauty and that form of embodiment. And I would say that there's a bit of relief even in being in public and feeling less sexualized.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that you want to become unattractive, but, there are ways that even if you are, attractive for your age or whatever, or you work to maintain your appearance, there's just something recognizable about a woman who is, as they say, of a certain age, and
Mm-hmm.
it changes the perception of sexual availability in some cases for a lot of people. So anyway, those are some of the pleasures, strangely enough, for me when I think about aging.
No, I definitely hear you on that, especially this last one on the pleasure of becoming invisible and the kind of freedom that brings with being less sexualized. I have definitely experienced being on a walk, in the city, or like going to the grocery store, or literally any public place. There have definitely been times where I have felt unsafe, being that
Sure.
I am a young woman who is, relatively pretty. And
Beautiful.
oh, stop it, you.
Yeah.
But no, I definitely hear you on that, and I would like to add that to one of my problems, if I may take it back to a place of that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's your list. Okay.
Yeah, let me just add that to my list. Being too damn sexy.
Well, while we're on this positive track, though, what else would you say is positive? I'm just, again letting you have a chance at that side of it.
Yeah.
What would you say?
Well, in the spirit of keeping things positive, I guess for me, like, it really is just in the simple things. I can't really like deep dive on these things because
Sure.
whenever I think about even just being able to go like to the liquor store and buy myself a bottle of wine after a long day
Yeah.
of work,
Sure.
the pleasure, the privilege of being able to do that.
Yep.
Or like feeling like I don't have to be held accountable to anybody if I want to go somewhere, do things, stay with friends for the night. I don't have to ask if that's okay for anybody,
Yeah.
That was definitely always, I know that that's a common experience for, teenagers, children alike. But even in that, there's a great pleasure in that. Like, hey, I don't have to ask anybody if this is okay now. But then I think that this is maybe like the most profound thing, is just being able to explore my identity, being that
Sure.
I am able to, not that I'm able to, but I actually just care more about my own heritage. I think I spoke a little bit about that in our first episode, being that my mother is Colombian, and I recently had an ancestry DNA test as a gift for my graduation gift, and just learning about all of that, and just really,
Sure.
something about that has just been a huge, pleasure for me to learn about my background and all of that kind of stuff, but also exploring the different facets of spirituality, sexuality, different different, grown up things like that.
Of course.
And I love that for me. So,
I love that for you too.
so yeah, that's about it for me.
Okay, let's talk aspirationally now. Let me ask you this. What is healthy self-awareness through the lens of age? How's that for $1 million question?
Well, can I phone a friend really quick?
No.
All right. Well, if you must ask, for me, it's really just accepting that despite growing up on the internet and having access to this very large library of information online, I actually don't know everything, believe it or not, at this point in my life. And I feel like sometimes I can see myself being quick to dismiss others' views, especially if they're older white men. Who said that? I don't know. Anyway.
At the Gremlins.
Rather than being open to what they can teach me or what I can take away from that, whether that be a useful lesson to me or not, whether I just, in one ear out the other or not. Yeah. But I wanted to quickly take it back to the hidden moral injury of OK Boomer article that we referenced earlier.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I wanted to pull out this quote that said, "But just as older Americans can have an obligation to let go of professions of power, young Americans have obligations to hold on to their elders, to treasure them rather than shove them aside." And whenever I read that, it made me think of my grandma and your mother. Yes. And whenever I read that, I was just like, wow, if I only would have acknowledged and thought of like all of these questions that I had for her about, her lore, and I wish I just would have reaped more of the wisdom that she had to offer rather than just being like, Grandma, you're being annoying. Stop, But yeah, so I guess just a healthy self-awareness thing for me is just acknowledging that I need to, like I said, accept that I don't know everything and ask for help and ask for the valuable knowledge that comes with age and, experience and things like that whenever it comes to acknowledging the older people in my life. But it also means that I need to accept that I still need help, like I said, because again, I am just a girl. But it also means remembering that although I am just a girl, I'm very fortunate to be part of a generation that has had enough of the old ways of things, and that I do in fact have the power and ability and whatever you want to call it to help provoke change in the world, even if that be in small or insignificant ways. And another quote, so many quotes for me over here, but people just word things in a better way than I do sometimes,
I like that you read.
Well, I didn't get my theater degree for nothing, girl. But I discovered this article by Sam Heilman for the Campus online journal at Allegheny College in Pennsylvania. Uh-huh. And they had said, observe the sense of humor of a young person today, for example, and you'll likely be met with very thinly veiled nihilism. The structure of the world seems like a joke at this point, so why not laugh along? But we are the first generation with the ability to influence one another at any and all times, making change accessible. And so,
I like that.
Right? I was like, wow, like this whole article was really amazing. So yes. And I wanted to shout out the title of this article for anyone who would like to read it. It was titled Generation Z, Self-Absorbed or Just Self-Aware? Like I said, by Sam Heilman for the Campus Online. But yeah, so true. We are the first generation to really be able to just influencers is a job now for people in my generation,
I hear you.
and they make a lot of money doing it.
Right.
Yeah.
So many things that you just said were really meaningful to me. And I was earlier, before I started thinking about, I shouldn't, I need to cut some things out. I too you basically said it for me, the sense of
You're welcome.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, thank you. You're welcome. I'm all mixed up. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
You've thrown me off my rhythm. No. Anyway, I was just thinking about how that the lens of age, I do try to think from the standpoint of awareness that it is a filter that affects how I perceive the world. And I have to always be cognizant of that, right? So, that's my way of putting it. But you were saying many of those same things, and I think that's so important. From my perspective, though, looking at how I would view healthy self-awareness, additionally, besides that point, I think one thing is accepting the gifts that age brings to me. I really want to be grateful and accept those gifts, and I'm going to quickly talk about a few of them, nothing too in depth. Some of it gets, it'd be, life story types of things, so there's no point. But just knowing that there's increased clarity on who my real lasting friends are as time goes on, but also which new friends I make are perhaps longtime friends I just hadn't met before. I think that recognition of a friend is easier. So that clarity of friendship is really valuable to me. And I also find that I know more and more who my chosen family is, including some of my friends. But in my case, a history of religious trauma, which I don't even have, that's what I'm saying. I don't have time to go into all of this, but a history of religious trauma means that I have learned that some kinds of family engagement trigger me. They triggered despair in me. And so I've learned to appreciate my skills of sort of self-protection and so forth. But the other thing that I feel is a part of my own healthy self-awareness is I have less concern about what other people think. Sometimes, I should say. It's not a given. Just a quick example, I've always loved fashion and often will make artsy fashion or even knowingly eccentric choices that I will wear out in the open here in some of the rural realms I often inhabit. And around folks I'm sure are rolling their eyes behind my back some of the time. I think, so what? I'm happy in my clothes.
Exactly, as you should be.
So those are some of the things I think of with, being grateful and accepting the gifts of aging. But another aspect for me is not dismissing an opportunity, just out of hand by saying, "Oh no, I'm too old." Like the last time I was at a water park, a big water park where they have big water slides, maybe just a couple years ago. I still, I thought, no, I'm taking the high slide, and it was quite thrilling, and let alone other new challenges like podcasting of all things, right? So I just like to stay young that way. And my sense of being healthy at my age is to try new things. I'm put off actually by all the self-deprecation I hear from older people. When people joke about having senior moments, they've just forgotten some little thing that any 20-year-old could also forget or disparage their looks. I think self-awareness is important, but I just don't think it needs to lead at my age or even older to self-deprecation. Mm-hmm. And this is where I would say pushing back against ageism is important, an important part of my sense of being healthy and my awareness of things right now. There's this awful Medicare Advantage Advisors ad that features an older woman named Martha. And I looked it up again before we talked about some of this stuff, just to see if it was, out in the world besides just on the TV ads I see. And my gosh, yeah, there's a lot of copies of it. And it's apparently a series, and people complain bitterly. And I agree with some of the complaints about how dark an example it is of the most degrading ageist stereotypes. And here it is, an advertisement that's supposed to appeal to older viewers. So that's
for Medicare.
It's like, it's as though, I don't know. It's this combination of the self-deprecation and ageism all in one package, I guess, is one way to look at it. But the only other example I would like to use of that is that I read an op-ed recently. Op-ed piece recently. It was in one of the major newspapers. Don't even want to cite the author or the title. I don't remember them anyway, but it was so backhanded. In this case, it was talking about Joe Biden using his foreign policy experience during the terrible situation we have going, of course, at the time of this recording, the Israel and Gaza, the horrible stuff happening in that part of the world is still fairly new. But almost anytime something was positive about the coverage of Joe Biden's experiences in trying to deal with that situation, there was a caveat. There was more or less, oh, he does this, and even though he's old. And I think, I don't think it doesn't really matter your political persuasion, I don't think, on this. At least it shouldn't,
Right.
because it's, to me, it's like saying, oh, wow, she's a great lawyer and she's a woman. But why are we okay with this when it comes to age? And that's a rhetorical question, of course. But yeah, those are some of the things that I think about. So,
Right. All right, girl. So as we close out here, if I may just ask you one final question, what comes to mind when we think about how we can age courageously?
well, if I had to, I don't have time to get into all of that, but I would just say there's one thing I'm really looking forward to, because I like role models for good examples of aging, and there's so many out there. Jimmy and Rosalynn Carter, there's so many great people to look to who are older even and are great examples of aging. But I am really looking forward to the release of the film Nyad, which is coming right up in about 3 days from the time we're recording, November 3rd. Diana Nyad being the woman who swam from Cuba to Florida without shark protection, and after 5 tries and at age 60. That to me sounds like I know it's a great story from just the history of it, but I'm looking forward to the performance of it in a film. So that would be one thing that comes to my mind as we close out. What about you?
Love.
Yeah.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, this idea of the inner child, for me, that I find it very important to always acknowledge and care for my inner child and remember the experiences and like the things that I feel now, even though I might think of that as maybe childish at some points or whatever that may be. That's important to me, and remember to just care for the things that I've been through and the places that I will be going with that, and just taking care of that within me, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. I hope you'll do that.
Of course, there will be things in life that will just be out of my control and inevitably cause pain and confusion. And that's just part of being human. Am I right?
Unfortunately, you are absolutely right, as you are so often.
I feel fire between you and me.
Well, girl, it's been a pleasure, as always.
Sure has, my friend. I'll talk to you soon, girl. And hey, I'll be praying for you, okay?
Oh, please, always.
Always. Love ya. Bye.
You too. Bye.